Ladies and gentlemen, while John cues the next PowerPoint, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. I first met Malcolm in 2008, but that's another story. He's been involved in humanities education in South Australia since 1976, which is not quite as long as Jeff Tate's been on the planet, teaching in a range of Department of Education schools and as a teacher and coordinator. He's most well known, though, as for his role as heading up the Premier's Anzac Spirit School Prize in South Australia since its inception in 2008. And in fact, an encounter with that group started me on another journey which you probably know all about. But it was through that endeavour that we first met. And over a couple of years we spent, I lost count of the amount of meetings and endless and fruitless pursuits with people that shall remain nameless who were absolutely no help at all. But we did boost one another's morale and keep on going. That endeavour resulted in what's become the virtual War Memorial. But Malcolm has also worked in the development of the Australian curriculum for geography and history at a national level, and he's been heavily involved in the implementation of the Humanities Learning Centre of the Australian curriculum in South Australian schools. He's also a teaching academic at the University of South Australia, where he's bringing up the next generation of teachers. One of whom I know personally actually was a product of the Anzac Spirit Prize, a young lad who I had the pleasure of escorting in 2013. In the meantime, Malcolm has supported humanities and social sciences throughout the development of history resources and the provision of extensive professional learning across Australia since 1999. Please welcome Malcolm McInerney.
Thank you, and it's lovely to be back here after I've got a bit of flack already from some of my colleagues here that I've come back again. But thank you so much for having me again. And I'm going to talk about something totally different to the Governor's Civics Awards, which I talked about last time. I'll get straight into it. I want to talk about the Premier's Anzac Spirit School Prize, which, as Steve just said, started way back in 2007. It was a bit of a brainchild of the RSL in South Australia and was strongly supported by the Premier of South Australia at the time, Mr. Mike Rann. The aim was to get students to know stories about those who have served. I'm not a service person. My dad was, my uncles were, but I wasn't. I'm a historian and a teacher of 45 years. You'll see three faces on that poster, and as I've put brochures on your tables, and Jodie's done that with us. And I've called it Every Face Has a Story. Every year there's a different theme. This year we wanted the theme to be about the multicultural soldier. So you'll see on that poster there's a Indian Hindu, an Indian Muslim and a Irish Australian. They weren't just all Anglo bronzed Anzacs, there was a whole mixture of people who were called to service. So that's the theme in this year. When I talk to schools, and I'm not going to read this to you, it's okay, I'm just going to whiz through, I want students to imagine some things, and it's unimaginable for someone like myself who hasn't served beyond the classroom. But for young people to imagine those things, to imagine going off not knowing where you're going, not knowing if you're going to come back, not knowing what is going to happen. It must, and some of you are service person who served in war here. It's something which I think people should, and I want students to imagine what it's like, and it must be very hard for them. So that's some of the questions we pose to students. There's a picture of Villa Britannieu from 2010. One of them is the Governor of South Australia, Hugh Van Lay. He came on the trip with us, and he's walking up to the memorial at the top. 14 years, 8,000 students have uncovered stories. They've researched. What they have to do is research a service person or a nurse who served in the war. That's no easy task, particularly to do something which is original. So we want students not to copy out of books, we want them to go and talk to relatives. Can't talk to World War I veterans now, World War II they can. To read diaries, to read journals, to look at the archives and develop stories which in many cases have never been uncovered before or told. And they finish up on the virtual War Memorial, which, as you know, Steve is the instigator of. The ones who are lucky enough to do the best entries do have a prize. It's called a prize, so we need to have a prize. And since 2007, that's some of the places the students have gone. They've gone to France, South Korea, places where our service people have served. I just 2 days ago came back from Darwin. I've just taken the students up to Darwin for 14 days. 14 days with 15 to 16-year-old young people, 16 of them, and the best thing is they love history. So I'm in heaven. They even listen to me. You know, I can talk history and geography and take them to... They've had a wonderful time. But more importantly, they've been able to commemorate. There's some of the students from 2019. We went to Vietnam for 4 years and we do a ceremony at Long Tan, and they're the students from that year. It's a chance for them to pay respects and learn. And there's a student, in fact, Alice Dawkins, who now works in the United Nations. She's actually the daughter of Richard Dawkins, who was the Federal Minister for Education back in the Hawke government, or Keating government, I'm not sure. But she came in 2010, and there she is laying a cross in France. But the most important thing is about personal stories, about not necessarily generals or kings, but it's just about a normal bloke, a normal girl who goes to war. And because of that, they are changed forever. If they come back, they're changed forever. If they pass away. The other thing, we want students to find those names on the virtual War Memorial. And I promised Bob Carney from the virtual War Memorial, if you know Bob, I've just spent 2 weeks with him in Darwin. He came on the trip as the RSL delegate. I promised Bob that I would say something about the virtual War Memorial. Steve, here it is. Most students who enter this prize, and that's where the genesis of the War Memorial, we wanted something where students could go to get original sources, archival sources, and also to upload the stories they uncover, and for families to do that. So all of us know that we can go to any name on any board and we can track it through the virtual War Memorial, whatever the soldier's name. So I'm sure Steve has talked about that here before. Is that right, Steve? Okay. But I've done what Bob wanted me to do. I've done it. And it's really important. The synergy between the virtual War Memorial and the Anzac Prize, I don't think should be lost. That's the medallion that all students who win the prize get. And you may see down the bottom of it, it says commemoration through research. We're really keen that students don't just emote. That is, oh, so sad, you know, all that emotional stuff. We want students to recognise through knowledge what happened and has happened and what happened to people. It's more than emoting. It's also about knowing. So that's the medallion the students get. I show that particular picture and say they're just faces. I know Steve knows some of those faces, but a lot of those stories behind everyone. I know Ross Smith's up there, but you don't know all those stories. If you do want to see the stories the students have uncovered, the winners are put up on the Department of Veterans SA website, and they're wonderful to read. I'm going to read one story, and I know I've got not a long time. And this chap did come back, and to you it's just a guy. Frederick Tupe is his name, and this was done by a boy from Kingston who wrote this particular entry for the Anzac Prize 2 years ago. He was a 21-year-old farmer from Kingston. He was called Tiny because he was 6'4". He was a medic on the Western Front during World War I and was often requested by wounded because of his stature that was said to have made the soldiers feel safe. As a medic, Frederick was exposed to horrific injuries and sights, experience that caused him post-traumatic stress after the war. He was never able to tolerate blood or even the sight of a bleeding animal, such as sheep and cut during shearing, which was a problem as a farmer. Frederick was praised by the surgeons at the front when operating because of his height and his strength, which enabled him to hold a lantern above the surgery table for hours on end while they attempted to save countless lives. We're getting a picture for young Frederick. After the armistice, he survived the war and he stayed on in Europe. Frederick was chosen to ring the bell at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris to signify peace. From hundreds of thousands of servicemen, 6 soldiers representing the British Empire, France and America were selected for the honour. We don't know why he was selected, but some people believe it was because of his strength and height. The story goes that as the bell ringers were approaching the bell tower, an American serviceman pushed his way to the front of the group. In response, a Canadian serviceman grabbed hold of the American and told Frederick, "Get going, Aussie, it's your honour." A year after the war finished, Frederick returned to his farm on the Coorong to lead a successful life as an innovative farmer and apiarist. Now that's just one story written by, and that's only an excerpt from it, that we received from William Wiseman from Kingston Community School. This is a cross-sector project, Catholic education, independent school and state schools. We usually get at least half the state schools, quarter independent, quarter sector. We get students from Woodner to Prince Alfred College, to St Peter's College, to Kingston, and when they all gather together, there's no difference. The second story I want to tell you, and I hope you don't mind me telling you stories, but this is about stories. And this one is from one of my students I just took to Darwin, a lass called Michaela Lockwood from Mount Barker High School. Story of a nurse called Blanche Atkinson. Nurses also, increasingly, since the prize has started, increasingly we're getting stories of nurses as well, which we all know had to suffer terribly as well. It's a short and sad story. As a nurse working in Belair, Alice enlisted as soon as war was declared. In July 1915, she left for Europe, sent to Brockenhurst Hospital in London. Hours were long, the work conditions demanding, especially being exposed firsthand to the suffering of a shattered young man. Alice nursed in London through to March 1916 when, with her immune system compromised from working long and difficult hours, she contracted influenza, as many did. While in hospital, Alice was awarded a Red Cross medal, a recognition given to a brave young woman for their actions. After a few months in hospital and somewhat recovering the disease, Alice was repatriated back to Australia to the relief of her family. However, in December 16, she died of TB. This was only 18 months after leaving her home in Adelaide Hills, as you can see there, as a healthy young woman to serve her country. So that's just one other story. Both survived the war until they fell. I think it's really important that we just don't recognise the ones on the boards. As you know, the Australian, correct me, Steve, but anyone who died after March the 21st, 2021 is not on the Australian War Memorial boards. Yeah?
That's correct, but there are some on local memorials.
Yeah. Right. But many died, might have been 10 years, 20 years from the effects of war. Yeah. How many? Yeah. And the other ones which increasingly I'm seeing the stories being told, the impact of them. Don't forget, these are year 9 and 10 students entering this competition. Can I just talk a little bit about Darwin, which I've just come back from? There's the students at the cenotaph on the esplanade at Darwin. We went to the 100th anniversary of that. The Governor-General, as you can see there's David Hurley, a military man, who is talking to the students. What a buzz for them to have our Governor-General having a chat to them about why are they there, what are you doing? And I was proud that the students said, we're here to tell stories and commemorate those who fell. And that's the Governor-General, David Hurley, talking to the students with his wife. Whilst they were in Darwin, even though they'd entered the competition, won the competition from doing a really extensive research assignment, often not recognised by the school, by the way, they usually do this in their own back, I made them research someone who died during the Darwin bombing. And just like I did with the other one, we've got faces up there. At the beginning of the trip, we didn't know those faces. By the end of the trip, every night the students, after a hard day out in the field, sat down quite happily and shared their story and put a story behind each of those faces. The other thing I just wanted to allude to, this young lass, and I won't say her name, wouldn't embarrass her, but the first 2 days of the trip she didn't speak. She was incredibly quiet and shy. We ran an Anzac dinner at the Military War Museum in Darwin on the last night, and I asked her to get up and tell her story. And there she is, talking to the Lord Mayor, is in the crowd, the Minister of Veterans Affairs in the Northern Territories in the crowd, and about 50 other people. Now to me, I don't know about you, but when I was at school, I would have been petrified to get up in front of anyone. So the other part of this is these young people, I do a lot of public speaking training on the trip. So when they come back, they'll come and talk to Rotaries. They'll come to talk to Probuses. Anywhere, I say you've got to go and tell the story. You are now, thanks to the Premier's Prize, ambassadors for the telling of stories about those who served. And so as 15, 16-year-olds, these are the ones who keep the stories alive. This is one of the stories, and I'll finish up because it's almost time. And this is just, and I found this a fascinating story, of a man called Francis Bassett Ems. And I don't know about you, but I feel a little bit ashamed that I knew so little about the Darwin years during World War II and what actually went on up there. I know it was a secret during the war. Some of you will be all across it, but it's really very interesting history and important history for our young people to know what happened on our own soil. He worked in a tailor's shop. He was a quite easygoing man. March the 14th, 28th, he began his training as an ordinary seaman. He would spend the next 7 years on postings to various ships, including HMAS Sydney too. He would serve aboard Sydney for 2 years, got off before it got sunk, where he suffered from eyesight deterioration. That led him to become a cook in January 37, and he did a cookery course and finished up on the HMAS Canberra in 38 as a lead cook. Whilst in Darwin, Ems at the depot, HMS Melville, where he was employed as a cook, He was working as a cook, but also the boom gates across Darwin. He was on the HMAS Melville, which supervised the booms opening and shutting to keep the submarines out. During the first raid of Darwin on February the 19th, 1942, Ems was manning the boom gates while serving on the doomed ship HMAS Karakara. When the raid began, 2 of Ems' crewmates were instantly killed. To save the ship and other personnel, Ems rushed in line of fire to begin strafing, returning fire even whilst he'd been fatally wounded. His effort was a key reasoning behind the break-off in the Japanese attack, saving the lives of several shipmates. He would have succumbed to his wounds on board hospital ship Menunda, which my father served on, later that day. In a letter to Mrs. Ems from a good friend, Ems did not complain, and in his dying moments he gave a thumbs up. That was a story written by Mia, that girl who I said was so scared of talking. And that's just an excerpt. So, I've just shared 3 stories today, but hopefully it's giving you an idea of what the Anzac Prize is about. It's about young people doing history, commemorating and learning. And as I'm often told by Bob Carney, it's not just lest we forget, but we shall remember them. How can you remember saying if you don't know the story? If you know of any young person, get them to enter the Anzac Prize this year. It's open, closes May the 21st, but it'll be on again next year. And the entry information is all on those brochures which are on your tables. Thank you so much for listening about the Premier's Anzac Prize, something I'm really proud of and something which I think has to continue into the future so those stories are remembered. I'd also like just to all students and supporters of the prize get a medallion. I'd like to present that to Rotary Steve as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Happily accept it. Don't go away. We've got time for a couple of questions. Do we have any from the floor? Lisa.
Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, year 9s and 10s, do they get freaked out by these stories? Do they become overwhelmed and, with the trauma and the impact of particularly the survivors?
I'm never but amazed by the maturity of these students who enter. We all know Anzac Day, we didn't have huge numbers there 20 years ago when we were growing up. And you look at a crowd of young people at Anzac Day, I won't answer your question yet, but there's tons of them, aren't they? They're really engaged, and they'll stand there, even at the footy when there's gear going on during the Anzac round, they'll stand there respectful. So whether they're traumatised by it, I mean, obviously a teacher's not going to do all the blood and gore, but there is some really tough stories told, particularly if suicide is part of the story as well. So we have to handle that sensitively. But usually the students will pick their own person and research it. So, yeah, maybe they are. Maybe they see a little bit of what life is about in tough times.
Anyone else? No.
Two stories I wonder if worth exploring. World War One, Sir Wilfred Hubert Wilkins. An amazing story that most of us knew nothing about. A military cross without ever carrying a rifle.
Two.
Yeah, and bar. And from World War Two, probably the largest single naval disaster, the 2nd 22nd Battalion, more than 1,000 men lost, sunk in a POW ship by the USS Sturgeon. Another story.
Yeah, there's many stories. And talking about Hubert Wilkins, when I was president of the Geography Association of South Australia, we actually set up a Hubert Wilkins Award for students who were doing outstanding exploration or sort of adventure type work. So he's an amazing story, isn't it? We won't spend a whole lot of time. We could spend days on Hubert Wilkins. All right.
Thanks, Dr. White. Ladies and gentlemen, no, stay there. I'm sure you'll agree that was a fascinating presentation, and it's part of the reason that Malcolm and I hit it off so easily. 2008, was it that long ago? But it was. I encountered the students while I was on a battlefield tour in France, and the idea was we can't let all this research they're doing just get lost on a CD in a school library somewhere. So there we go. And look, before I present our Certificate of Appreciation to Malcolm, I just want to make an announcement concerning the VWMA and one of our esteemed elder statesmen of this club. Yesterday, after about 8 years' endeavours, the VWMA was awarded DGA status by the tax office. I can't tell you how much that means. When you've got to struggle for every dollar, it's enormous. And I just want to acknowledge the efforts of the Chair, Peter Williams, our CEO, Sharon Roberts, and the people who made it happen, Sir Eric Neal, our own esteemed member, who was yesterday honoured at a Australian Institute of Company Directors lunch, and he told this story with relish. And a similar story where he'd nailed Paul Keating many years ago. But Sir Eric Neal, Sir Peter Cosgrove and Senator Simon Birmingham. It's all part of the story. These students contribute that information, and the whole thing basically is it self-fulfills. So Malcolm, thanks for your role and the vision it took to get that up and get the political backing it needed to sustain it. And it's still going strong. And as I said, a student I escorted in 2013 was writing like postgraduate level material, and he's a teacher now, so what better endorsement can you get? Malcolm, thank you very much, and would you please accept our Certificate of Appreciation? Thank you. Thank you.